The scream cut through the midnight air as if the earth itself had cried out in pain. Evelyn clutched her chest, her breath sharp, her world cracking apart in a single heartbeat. The candlelight flickered violently, casting monstrous shadows across the walls, and she whispered, "Why now? Why must everything be torn from me?" Her tears blurred her sight, yet she still saw the old wooden door swing open with force, revealing her father's lifeless body carried in by neighbors, their silence more terrifying than their words. One of them said, "He collapsed at the factory. There was nothing we could do." The words rang like iron against stone, each syllable crushing her fragile hope. She staggered back, her knees trembling, her soul unraveling as her mother's sobs filled the room like a storm that drowned all reason. Evelyn's mind screamed for escape, but her body was paralyzed, anchored by grief. In that moment, poverty tightened its grip around her throat, whispering that nothing she loved would ever last. Her mother collapsed to the floor, wailing, her frail hands clawing at the air as though she could pull her husband's soul back from the void. Evelyn pressed her palms to her ears, but still the echoes of loss screamed inside her. Darkness was no longer the absence of light. It was the presence of despair. The night dragged into morning, but the weight of grief refused to lift. Evelyn sat by the window, her face pale and hollow as dawn's light spilled across the dirt floor. She whispered, "Everything feels empty now." Her mother's sobs echoed faintly in the other room, thin and fragile like glass about to break. Outside, neighbors went on with their lives, yet to Evelyn, the world had collapsed and left her alone among ruins. She thought of her father's hands, calloused from endless hours at the factory, now motionless forever. The thought carved into her chest like a knife. Poverty had already starved them, but now it had stolen the one anchor holding them steady. Evelyn said softly, "If I fall apart, she will have nothing left." The weight of responsibility crushed her, but something within her whispered that she must endure. The world had no mercy for girls like her, but still she refused to collapse entirely. She wiped her tears with the edge of her sleeve and stared at the horizon as if searching for an answer, her heart trembling but not yet defeated. The day grew harsher as neighbors brought scraps of food and whispered condolences that felt hollow in Evelyn's ears. She smiled faintly to their faces, but when they left she whispered, "They pity us but cannot save us." Her mother lay weak on the straw mattress, staring at the ceiling, her voice breaking as she muttered, "What will we do without him?" Evelyn knelt beside her, holding her trembling hand. She said, "We will survive somehow." Inside, doubt clawed at her, reminding her how fragile their lives had always been. The factory debt, the hunger, the stares from wealthier families who treated them like dust, it all pressed down on her shoulders. She imagined the landlord knocking soon, demanding what they could never pay. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay steady. "I will carry us forward," she thought, though her voice inside trembled like a brittle thread ready to snap. That evening, Evelyn stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The air was sharp with the scent of wood smoke, and the sky blazed with fading crimson. She balanced the bucket against her hip, her body aching from exhaustion. 2 village boys passed by, their laughter sharp as knives, and one said, "Poor girl, she'll starve soon." The words stung, but she kept her head down, her voice silent. Her hands tightened on the bucket's handle until her knuckles whitened. She whispered to herself, "I will not let them see me break." Each step back toward the cottage felt heavier than stone, but also carried with it a flicker of defiance. She had no riches, no shield, no father anymore, but she still had willpower, fragile, yet burning deep within her. Night fell heavy again, shadows stretching long across the cottage walls. Evelyn sat by the hearth with her mother, who whispered prayers with trembling lips. The fire crackled softly, its glow too weak to push back the chill creeping into the room. Evelyn thought of her father's stories of hope, his belief that someday their suffering would mean something. She said softly, "I'll carry those stories now." Her mother leaned against her shoulder, too weak to respond, but her presence still mattered. Evelyn's heart ached, yet she felt a new thread of strength weaving through her grief. She knew the world would not gift her salvation, but she could choose to endure, even if it meant carrying more weight than she thought possible. And in that dim glow, Evelyn decided that she would not surrender to despair, not tonight, not ever. The following morning, Evelyn dragged herself to the factory where her father had once labored. The iron gates loomed tall, their rusted bars cutting across the sky like prison walls. She whispered to herself, "This place killed him, and now it demands me." The overseer, a sharp-eyed man with a cruel mouth, looked her over with disdain and said, "You're small, but your hands can work. Don't waste time." His voice carried no sympathy, only the cold weight of ownership. Evelyn lowered her gaze and followed him into the dim, choking air of the workshop. Machines roared like beasts, metal clanging in endless rhythm, dust thick enough to choke each breath. She thought of her father bent over these very machines, breaking himself to keep food on the table. Her chest burned, but she swallowed the pain, whispering, "I'll endure for her." Around her, tired faces barely glanced her way, each too consumed by their own suffering. The overseer shouted again, "Faster! Every second is money." Evelyn's hands trembled, but she forced them steady. In that moment, she felt the weight of poverty tightening its chains, yet a tiny flame of defiance flickered inside her heart. By midday, sweat soaked Evelyn's dress as she carried heavy sacks across the factory floor. Her body screamed in protest, but she refused to slow. A young man beside her, his face gaunt with exhaustion, whispered, "Don't fight too hard, they'll break you faster." She looked at him, saw despair hollowing his eyes, and replied softly, "If I give in, I'll break anyway." The machines hissed, the floor rattled with vibrations, and smoke clawed at her lungs. The overseer's voice cracked through the air again, "Work harder, or you're out." Evelyn's mind spun with fear of hunger, but her hands tightened around the sack, her muscles trembling as she pushed forward. The young man sighed and turned away, his shoulders collapsing under invisible weight. Evelyn bit her lip, tasting iron, but her eyes shone with stubborn fire. She thought of her mother at home, frail and waiting, and muttered, "For her, I'll keep standing." The day dragged on like an endless sentence, yet with each step, she carved a silent promise never to surrender entirely. When evening shadows crept into the factory, Evelyn stumbled to the water trough outside. She splashed her face, the coolness shocking against her burning skin. As droplets dripped down her chin, a voice startled her. It was Marcus, a man from the village known for lending kind words when few others did. He said, "You shouldn't be here, Evelyn. This place will crush you like it crushed him." She froze, the words twisting a knife in her heart. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. Marcus's eyes softened, though sadness clouded them. "Choice is rare here, but strength is rarer. Don't let them see you fall." Evelyn met his gaze, searching for truth in his words, and for a moment she felt less alone. But as footsteps approached, she turned away quickly, masking her vulnerability. She muttered under her breath, "Strength is all I have left." The sound of the machines echoed still in her bones, and she carried that weight back inside with her, a silent vow, etched deeper into her soul. The overseer's temper flared as darkness set in, his voice rising above the machine's roar. He shouted, "You think this is hard? This is survival." Evelyn's muscles ached beyond measure, her arms heavy as stone. Yet as he barked, she caught sight of another worker, a girl near her age, collapsing against the wall, too weak to stand. No one moved to help her, fear chaining them all. Evelyn's instinct surged, and she rushed forward, catching the girl's shoulders before she hit the floor. The overseer snarled, "Leave her, she's useless." Evelyn's heart thundered as she answered, "She's human." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence fell for a second. Then the overseer's glare scorched her, but she did not flinch. The girl whispered a faint, "Thank you," before slipping into unconsciousness. Evelyn's pulse raced, fear tightening her throat, but pride smoldered inside her. She had defied the rules, if only for a moment. The overseer's scowl promised punishment, but Evelyn thought, "Let him see my fire." The walk home that night was slow and heavy, every step dragging Evelyn's body closer to collapse. The moon hung low, pale against the darkened sky, and the air smelled of coal and sorrow. Her arms shook from the day's labor, but her mind burned with the overseer's words. She muttered, "He can curse me, but he cannot own me." The memory of the fainting girl's face replayed in her mind, fragile yet human, reminding her why she had spoken out. She pushed open the cottage door to find her mother awake, waiting by the dim fire. Her mother asked, "You worked all day?" Evelyn nodded, too tired for lies. She sat down, her bones aching, and whispered, "I will carry us no matter what it takes." Her mother's hand reached out, trembling, to brush her cheek, and though silence stretched between them, it spoke more than words. For the first time since her father's death, Evelyn felt a flicker of strength deep inside, a strength born not from survival alone, but from defiance. The factory's chaos grew worse with each day, smoke thicker, orders harsher, and Evelyn's body weaker. Yet she forced herself onward, determined not to collapse. During one shift, she overheard whispers of missing wages, workers cheated out of their pay. Her chest tightened as dread crept in. The overseer barked at a man demanding answers. "You'll take what we give you or nothing at all." Evelyn's blood burned with fury, but her voice stayed locked inside her throat. The betrayal of sweat and labor stolen by greed pressed down like a mountain. At the edge of the workshop she whispered to herself, "This is theft of our lives." Her hands clenched until her nails cut her palms, pain grounding her resolve. She imagined her mother's empty stomach, the debt waiting at their door, and she felt the trap closing tighter. Still, her eyes lifted, blazing with anger. If survival meant silence, then silence was the weapon of her oppressors. The overseer's sneer carved deeper into her spirit, yet Evelyn thought, "I will not die voiceless." That evening, Evelyn sat alone by the riverbank outside the village. The moonlight shimmered over the dark water as her reflection stared back at her, pale and worn. She whispered, "We give them everything, and they steal even more." The night was quiet except for the rush of water, but inside her head, voices of the overseer and mocking villagers screamed. Her heart pulsed with rage and despair tangled together like chains. A soft rustle came from behind her, and Marcus's voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. Evelyn looked up, weary but sharp. "The water listens better than people," she replied. He sat beside her, the weight of silence between them heavy but not cruel. For the first time in days, Evelyn let her tears fall without shame, the river swallowing them whole. "Marcus said gently, "Your strength frightens them, but don't let it frighten you." She turned to him, searching for meaning, and whispered, "Then I must learn to carry it." The next morning, Evelyn returned to the factory with heavy eyes but sharper resolve. The overseer noticed and smirked, his words slicing, "Still alive, barely worth the food you eat." Evelyn's jaw clenched, but she stayed silent, knowing his cruelty fed on reaction. As machines rattled, she overheard two workers whispering, "Shall break soon. No one lasts here." Their voices dug into her, but instead of despair, fire rose inside. She thought, "They want me broken, so they can believe survival is impossible." She lifted another sack with trembling arms, her body straining, but she refused to falter. The overseer sneered louder, "See how weak she is?" Evelyn staggered but steadied herself, glaring back for the first time. The workers fell silent, startled by the flash of defiance in her eyes. Evelyn whispered under her breath, "Weakness is not silence." In that moment, she knew her fight was not only against hunger, but against the belief that her life meant nothing. That night, Evelyn sat by the fire with her mother, the silence between them thick with unspoken fear. Her mother's frail voice finally broke, "He's gone, and you're fading too. I can't lose you." Evelyn reached for her hand, pressing it gently, and whispered, "I must be strong, for both of us." Her mother's eyes glistened, filled with pain and love entwined. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across the walls, reminding Evelyn of chains and cages. Her mother said softly, "You carry too much, my child." Evelyn shook her head, her voice trembling but steady. I carry us because no one else will. For a moment, her mother's lips curved into a small broken smile, pride hidden beneath sorrow. Evelyn leaned closer, resting her forehead against her mother's, and whispered, even if the world crushes me, I will rise again. The fire's warmth touched her cheeks, but her heart burned with something fiercer, a refusal to yield. Days later, tension in the factory erupted when wages were handed out short once more. A worker shouted, "This is theft!" The overseer's face twisted, his voice a whip. You're nothing without this place. Evelyn's chest tightened as rage rippled across the workers, but silence drowned their rebellion. She stepped forward, her voice trembling yet sharp. We bleed for this work, yet you steal our blood's worth. The overseer snapped, Shut your mouth, girl. His glare burned into her, but she stood firm, hands shaking but unmoving. The room fell silent, workers watching, waiting for punishment to fall. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she thought, better to be struck for truth than chained by lies. For the first time, her words cut through fear, and the overseer faltered for a moment. Though danger loomed, Evelyn felt something shift. Her defiance was no longer hidden, and silence was no longer her cage. The factory's air grew heavier as Evelyn noticed Daniel, the one she had once trusted, whispering with the overseer. Her stomach twisted when she heard him say, She talks too much. She'll bring trouble. Betrayal sliced through her like a blade. She whispered, Even those close can cut the deepest. The overseer's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, feeding on Daniel's words. Evelyn's fists tightened, not at the overseer's cruelty, but at the friend who sold her for safety. That night, Evelyn walked home under a bleeding red sky, the betrayal replaying in her mind. She whispered, He chose survival over me. Anger battled grief in her chest, twisting into a storm she could not contain. The world had always been cruel, but betrayal from someone she trusted left her hollow. Yet as her mother's fragile voice called from inside, Evelyn wiped her tears and whispered, I'll carry us, even if I carry scars. Days later, Evelyn returned to the factory to find whispers spreading. Workers glanced at her with suspicion, Daniel's betrayal poisoning their view. She said under her breath, He made me the enemy. The overseer smirked, satisfied with the division. The betrayal cut deeper as loneliness settled around her. She thought, even in suffering we are turned against one another. Her jaw tightened, and she forced herself to endure. One evening, Evelyn overheard Marcus speaking quietly to her. Betrayal hurts, but it cannot define you, he said. Her voice cracked as she replied, It was easier to fight the overseer than the knife of a friend. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, firm yet gentle. You're stronger than the ones who abandon you. His words echoed like balm, but pain still burned beneath her skin. The catalyst struck suddenly, wages withheld entirely, overseer roaring, you get nothing until order is restored. Workers froze, but Evelyn's fury boiled over. She whispered, Starvation will not silence me. Her body trembled, yet her voice carried louder than before. This was the spark, not just betrayal but the fire that forced her to choose, surrender or rise. In that moment, Evelyn felt the chains snapping inside her heart. The next morning, Evelyn awoke with her chest heavy, yet her spirit burning brighter. Her mother asked weakly, Why fight when it only brings pain? Evelyn kissed her hand and whispered, Because silence feeds them, and truth feeds us. Her body still ached from work, but her soul had shifted. She carried her father's memory, her mother's survival, and her own worth like armor. As she stepped outside into dawn's light, she said quietly, They will not break me. For the first time, her footsteps felt like defiance rather than retreat. Back at the factory, Evelyn's fire spread. When the overseer shouted, Obey or starve, she stepped forward, trembling but loud. We starve already, even when we obey. Gasps rippled through the workers. The overseer's face darkened, his authority challenged. Daniel stood silently in the corner, guilt flickering across his eyes. For a moment, silence hung heavy, Then Marcus added firmly, "She speaks truth." Evelyn's knees shook, but her chest rose higher. For the first time, she wasn't alone. The overseer struck her across the face, the sound echoing like thunder. Evelyn staggered but did not fall. She whispered, "You can break my body but not my will." The workers froze, their fear a prison, but cracks appeared. A woman muttered, "She stands for us." The overseer barked louder, but his words seemed thinner now, his cruelty exposed. Evelyn's cheek burned with pain, but her eyes burned brighter. She thought of her father's endless labor, her mother's fragile breaths, Daniel's betrayal, Marcus's belief. All threads pulling into one truth. She was more than their victim. She was her own voice. The workers began to murmur, a wave building beneath the overseers, shouting. Marcus said, "We have bled enough." The overseer's eyes darted, fury mixed with fear, as the crowd stirred. Evelyn raised her voice again. "We are not cattle. We are not shadows. We are worth more than their chains." Her words rippled through the room like sparks on dry grass. Daniel stepped forward at last, shame softening his face. He whispered, "She is right." For the first time, workers stood straighter, their silence breaking. Evelyn's heart pounded, realizing her fire had ignited theirs. That night, Evelyn walked home, her body bruised but her spirit unbroken. Her mother waited by the fire, her frail eyes searching. Evelyn knelt beside her, whispering, "I spoke today, and they listened." Her mother's lips trembled into a weak smile, whispering, "Your father would be proud." Evelyn felt the weight of the day pressing heavy, yet also a lightness she had never known. Betrayal had scarred her, pain had burned her, but strength had risen from the ashes. She touched her mother's hand and whispered, "I chose worth over silence." Outside the night was dark, but Evelyn felt her own light glowing within. The factory became a battlefield of wills. The overseer's shouts clashed against Evelyn's steady defiance. "You are nothing," he spat, but Evelyn stood tall, her chest rising with every breath. She whispered fiercely, "Nothing cannot speak. Nothing cannot resist. I am not nothing." Workers shifted nervously, torn between fear and courage, their eyes flicking from her to him. The overseer raised his fist again, but Evelyn did not flinch. Her body trembled, yet her spirit surged, whispering louder inside, "Break me, and I will rise sharper." The silence that followed was heavy, every breath of the workers a drumbeat in her chest. For the first time the overseer looked uncertain, his authority cracking. Evelyn's resolve burned hotter, a light no cruelty could extinguish. The overseer roared, "Obey, or be cast into the streets." His threat thundered across the room, but Evelyn answered, her voice steady, "The streets already claim us. Your chains do not save us, they starve us." Gasps spread through the crowd. For a moment, the overseer faltered, his words caught by her fire. Marcus stepped forward, saying firmly, "We work, but we are not slaves." Daniel's guilt-stricken eyes shifted, his lips parting as though to add his voice. Evelyn felt her chest swell with something larger than fear. It was truth, raw and undeniable. Even if punishment struck her, she knew the seed had already been planted. In that moment she was no longer speaking for herself, but for everyone who bent beneath the weight of cruelty. The overseer lunged forward, gripping Evelyn's arm with brutal force. Pain shot through her, but she refused to cry out. She hissed, "Do it then. Prove to them you fear me." The workers gasped, their silence breaking into murmurs. The overseer's grip faltered, rage colliding with fear of the crowd's shifting loyalty. Marcus shouted, "Enough!" His voice cut like steel, ringing in the charged air. For the first time, others nodded, voices rising timidly behind him. Evelyn stared straight into the overseer's eyes, unflinching, her defiance unshakable. She thought, "Even pain cannot chain me." The overseer released her arm, his authority fractured in the eyes of everyone present. The workers' whispers grew louder, courage spilling into the room like a flood. A woman shouted, "She is right. We are dying already. Another man added, Why bow to thieves? The overseer shouted, Silence, but his voice no longer held power. Evelyn's heart raced, her hands trembling, but she raised her voice. We are worth more than their chains. If we endure in silence, we die in silence. If we speak, we live. The crowd surged with energy, heads lifting, spines straightening. Marcus looked at her with fierce pride. Daniel stepped forward at last, saying hoarsely, I was wrong. She is right. The overseer paled, his control slipping like sand. Evelyn thought, this is not the end, this is the beginning. The moment shattered when the overseer stormed out, his footsteps echoing like thunder. The factory fell into silence, broken only by the pounding of hearts. Evelyn's body sagged, exhaustion clawing at her bones, but her spirit stood taller than ever. Marcus whispered, You did what no one else dared. Daniel lowered his gaze, muttering, I betrayed you, yet you saved us. Evelyn replied softly, Not me. Us. Together. The workers stood in stunned awe, the fire she sparked now burning within them. As the machines rumbled on, Evelyn thought, The world has crushed me, betrayed me, starved me, yet I choose self-worth. I choose to rise. Her bruises throbbed, but they were no longer wounds. They were marks of transformation. The following dawn, Evelyn walked through the village, her bruises visible but her steps unshaken. Villagers stared, whispers following her, but she held her head high. She thought, They see scars. I feel strength. At the well, an older woman said softly, You carry the fire we lost long ago. Evelyn smiled faintly, her lips trembling, and replied, The fire belongs to all of us. For the first time, the stares of the villagers felt less like judgment and more like acknowledgement. The world had not changed, but Evelyn had, and that was enough to begin. At home, Evelyn sat with her mother, feeding her warm broth. Her mother's fragile eyes studied her face. You are different, she whispered. Evelyn nodded, brushing her mother's hair back gently. I found my voice, and it cannot be stolen. Her mother's lips curved into a fragile smile, whispering, Your father would call you his warrior. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes, but they no longer felt like weakness. They felt like release, proof she had survived. She leaned her head against her mother's, whispering, I will carry us not in silence but in strength. Evelyn returned to the factory, not as a servant of fear, but as a bearer of defiance. The overseer avoided her gaze, his control fractured. Workers greeted her with nods, small signs of solidarity. Marcus whispered, You lit the fire, now we keep it alive. Evelyn smiled faintly, her heart steady. Daniel approached hesitantly, his voice breaking, Forgive me. Evelyn met his eyes, her tone firm but calm. Betrayal marked me, but it will not define me. Learn and do better. His tears fell, but Evelyn turned back to her work, her spirit unyielding. One evening, Evelyn sat with Marcus beneath the fading sky. He said, You changed everything, Evelyn. She replied softly, No, I changed myself, and that is enough to begin. He looked at her with admiration, but she kept her gaze on the horizon. The world ahead was still uncertain, still harsh, but her heart no longer trembled. She whispered, The worth I sought in others was always inside me. Marcus nodded, silent but proud. The setting sun painted her silhouette in fire, as though the sky itself honored her transformation. That night, Evelyn lay beside her mother, the fire crackling low. She whispered, I chose self-worth over silence, over betrayal, over fear. Her mother's weak hand squeezed hers, and Evelyn smiled through tears. She knew the fight was not over, but her heart carried strength no overseer could crush, no betrayal could steal. The final thought before she drifted into sleep was clear. I am enough. I always was. Outside the night stretched wide and dark, but within Evelyn, a light burned unyielding, a flame born of suffering yet carried with pride.